Hi, everyone. I'm Constance Friedman with Modern Ventures and want to welcome you to another edition of our speaker series. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Roxanne and Rocco Martino. They are both the founders of their family office, Ocean 19, but we have, Ocean M19, but have amazing backgrounds and stories that we're really excited to share with you all today. I'm going to start with Roxanne. I don't normally go into such a lengthy bio, but you have such an amazing background that I'm gonna kind of say it all. And so bear with me, everyone. So Roxanne was the CEO and chairperson of the hedge fund Aurora Investment Management, where at its peak was up to about $14 billion. She was co-chairperson of the Business Council at University of Chicago Booth School. She is the life trustee of Fenwick High School and past chairperson of the Mendoza College of Business at University of Notre Dame. She is chairperson of the boards at Ann and Robert Lurie Children's Hospital and its medical center, as well as chair of its executive and governance committees. She is executive committee and on the boards of Chicago Network, Economic Club of Chicago, Investment Analysis Society of Chicago, and Bottom Line Chicago. And if that wasn't all enough, she appears on things like CNBC, Bloomberg TV. She's a contributing author of The Due Diligence Process and Evaluating and Implementing Hedge Fund Strategies, the book. And she's been inducted into the Investment Hedge Fund of Hedge Funds Hall of Fame in London and recognized as one of the 50 leading women of hedge funds. She is an absolute rock star. She started her career at PricewaterhouseCoopers, spent over 6 years at Grosvenor as a partner, and she graduated from both University of Notre Dame and at the Business School of University of Chicago. So her complement and partner in crime, Rocco, also an amazing rock star. Over 30 years investing in lower middle market and microcap companies. He co-founded LaSalle Capital, was general partner from 2004 to 2021, and has extensive board level experience working with entrepreneurs and management teams from everything from strategy formulation, productivity improvement, product line growth, strategic acquisitions, and so on. He has been on the board of companies like Precision Product Groups, Revco, National Gift Cards, Simplex, National Metalwares, Aventech, Academy of Healing Arts, and many others. And in addition to all of that, you'll see a pattern where they both give back a lot. Rocco is the chairman at the Edward Elmhurst Healthcare System Board of Trustees, member of Loyola University Chicago Board of Trustees, member of Notre Dame's Idea Center Advisory Council, and also at the School of Business for Loyola, member of the Economic Club of Chicago, and chairman of the Illinois Venture Capital Association. Also started at PwC, also was at the University of Notre Dame, where actually Roxanne and Rocco met. And with that, I want to dive into how this, just learning a little bit more about you guys personally, about your journeys, about how you supported each other throughout the years, and as always, advice to the aspiring entrepreneurs and investors who are building their career today. So thank you so much for joining us, first and foremost.
Sure, thank you, but all of that made me feel tired.
I bet. So if you don't mind, maybe we'll start with you, Roxanne. You could talk a little bit about, well, I think that, kind of coming from, let's start with the entrepreneurial part of your world, maybe for both of you, but where do you go from, big corporate PwC to launching a hedge fund? And my God, launching a hedge fund when you did, and I hate to bring the female aspect into it, but there's few of us in it even today and even fewer back then. So I am so interested in hearing your journey and how you got started.
Sure. I started my career really as an auditor, PwC, an accounting undergrad. Loved my years there, stayed there about 7 years, learned a lot. But I was in heavy metal, heavy industrial. So after a few years of that, we had merged with a smaller firm that did really back then commodity funds. The hedge fund business in the 70s was really more commodity oriented. And they asked for a volunteer to learn a new industry. And I thought, I better do something because I don't see any women in this industry. And so I learned a new industry. And after a certain amount of time, I thought, now I really think I'll enjoy this. And so I moved and went to Grosvenor Capital Management, stayed there about 6.5 years. So I'd worked about 14 years by then. And I thought if I was ever going to, go into the industry and do something on my own, this would be the time to do it with those two experiences behind me, and kind of took the leap to start Aurora Investment Management.
And so when you started, tell us a little bit about where you started. I can think about my own experience of having some really great partners around the table who are willing to take a bet, and kind of launching from there. But maybe you can share some of your experience and kind of what gave you the courage, what gave you the initial push to build such a successful firm.
So I actually went to one of my clients, Harris Associates at the time, that had come to us because they wanted to diversify their partner capital away from the US stock market because they were a long equity firm. And I actually started Aurora there, and I was a partner there for a number of years. And then we eventually sold the business. And shortly thereafter, I spun Aurora out of that business. And so I too had some very supportive partners at the beginning on my adventure of raising capital.
And so this was before Rocco, just to get the timing right, this was before you started LaSalle, is that correct?
No, Rocco started
in 1989.
You started first, okay.
Rocco started first, yeah.
All right, so maybe same question for you, like where, you talk about your journey, where you sort of built your stepping stones and then, decided that, yes, it's time to spin this out and go on and start something myself.
So these are always interesting questions to go back in time and figure out why you did something. In any case, it was 1988-ish where I spent a lot of time at Price Waterhouse doing leverage buyouts, which no one really knew much about at the time, but basically bootstrapping. And 1989, I made audit partner there, and I decided I had much more fun, seeing people understand how to take a business and grow it and ultimately profit from it. So I thought, why couldn't I do this on my own? Mm-hmm. So I reached out to one of my clients, similar to Roxanne, and started LaSalle Capital, which we were basically a fundless sponsor at the time. And our first deal was a $50 million transaction, and in those days, no one really had to put much equity into a transaction because banks were willing to lend on almost the entire purchase price. So it was a lot more work than I ever imagined, a lot more risk than I ever imagined, but it was much more interesting, and we had a lot of fun, and we just built a reputation over time, ultimately raising funds in order to buy companies.
So I think, when people are successful, or, it's easy to kind of go back and tell your story as if you had always planned it that way, right?
Right.
And as if everything worked out exactly as you thought it would. And everyone, we all come up with our own stories that fit together and make sense. But, I think that the reality is it never was that easy. And so, maybe you can talk about some of the challenges you encountered along the way and how that made you stronger, because ultimately that's what challenges do.
So I think the challenges as we moved along were many. I mean, first of all, you have to hire the right people to run the portfolio companies that you acquire. It's also trying to understand how to find the appropriate amount of capital with financial institutions who are supporting you. And you don't necessarily can predict the economic environment that surrounds these particular companies. And so therefore, once these variables come into play, you sometimes run into some difficulties, whether consumers aren't spending, or whether banks aren't lending, not enough capital to buy capital equipment, just trying to drive down efficiencies throughout the organization. And those were particularly challenging in the early days. And now there's much more sophistication in building a strategic plan, a 100-day plan, bringing on many consultants who can help in different areas. In those days, it was basically you doing most of the work and learning by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, I would say I agree with you, Constance. And I often thought in the later years of running Aurora, that people who joined the firm didn't understand that we weren't always this way.
Right.
So the way I think about it is it took us 13 years of doing the right thing all the time and raising $1 billion. So 13 years raising $1 billion. The next billion we raised in 13 months. So it's kind of like,
I mean, not quite that level for us, but yeah, it sounds familiar.
But once you're real and you have a track record and you're large enough for larger investors to invest with you, also the internet happened. And so our reach was largely creeping vine, where somebody who's been with us tells another person or another firm. And the internet really allowed people to search on performance and just get more information and more, it just blossomed. The whole industry blossomed. And we started getting clients from everywhere, really, all over the world. We had a very global business eventually. And I would say that the internet really changed everything for fundraising for us. And so, and everything took off. Also, I would say markets developed. When we started, it was largely US-based hedge fund market. Then it went to London, but then it became very broad-based. And, we also had hedge funds in Hong Kong and Singapore. We could find a lot of talent all over the world. So the global expansion of the industry was very helpful too.
So you guys have been investors for a very long time and in different markets, and asked two questions, one sort of more macro, one a little bit more micro. So on the macro side, we're going on this really long-term upcycle that not even the pandemic could break us down, right? And so from your experience and seeing the cycles, what does your crystal ball say right now, number one? And then, on a little bit of a micro, I'll ask you, some of the sectors that you're pretty excited about. So let's start with the crystal ball and where you think we are in this cycle and how it's different or not different, or what are your expectations?
I would say that we're definitely at the beginning of inflation in a way that probably you have to be as old as we are to remember it. And I think that most investors that are controlling most of the funds now have not been through a high inflation market. So I think it'll be very interesting for most investors to look at their portfolios and say, are we hedged enough against, pretty high inflation if it comes? Because when it comes very quickly. And
When
it's
you
very
when you look back at, sort of like if you'd had that crystal ball then, what should the managers be doing today to?
Well, that's very difficult. I was thinking, of course, I think now, not as a manager, I think now as a person investing my funds.
Sure.
So for us, it's, do you have enough assets in your overall portfolio construction that benefits from inflation? Because you certainly are going to have some things that are going to be impacted by inflation if you can't pass on pricing. So, I think about that and I worry about that. And I know Rocco has a different perspective probably on inflation because he thinks more at the company level, passing on, price increases in goods and services and labor. But, we do think about that and look at our portfolio construction, trying to be extremely diversified against, one thing I certainly have learned over time, you can never say that'll never happen, because in our career, everything has happened. Everything has happened.
Even a global pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, the one thing that I've learned recently through the pandemic is that we used to have an investment thesis that anything that you invest in the food sector should be relatively safe on the downside risk. Well, if you're delivering products or services to, the food service industry, like restaurants, you certainly found out pretty quickly that that wasn't a good thesis, that those companies could also go down, and they fell hard. And so that's something that I was shocked to learn. But, most of those businesses are bouncing back relatively quickly, but it's just another example where you think all of the downside risks, and after 30 some years we found another one.
We looked at a company just before the pandemic, actually, that was doing all their delivery to offices. And the model was that the offices would pay for it. And we're like, well, maybe in a downturn the office doesn't pay for it, the businesses don't pay for it anymore, but they had a mechanism so that employees could pay for their own stuff too, snacks and lunches and dinners and whatever. We never anticipated that you just wouldn't go to an office again. That just wasn't part of our risk profile, But yeah, it's never say never.
It's interesting that you say that. I was just in San Francisco this past week, and we all know when we walk downtown Chicago, it's fairly empty during the daytime or during what we would consider normal rush hour. It was, San Francisco was much the same. It was empty, and a lot of people weren't officing downtown. There's a lot of restaurants that aren't open as a result. I mean, there's a whole changing economic landscape that's going on right now that is a little scary.
Yeah, we don't exactly know what what the new norm is really going to be, right? And how this new norm just continues to drag. And it's really unclear what it's going to be 3 to 5 years from now in some of these cities, and the office environment, the work environment, the home environment. There's a lot of different theories and opportunities and challenges and that come along with it too.
And I think it's time for entrepreneurs to think very globally about the changing landscape of all of these industries, and how do you take advantage of that? I mean, it's kind of an exciting time because you can imagine what would happen and take advantage of that.
So that's a good segue into some of the opportunities. What are some of the things that you're getting more excited about? I know we've talked about some of them over the past, everything from environment and ESG, and some of the different things that you guys are specifically focused on in your own investing. So I'd love to hear what's getting you excited in this new norm.
Yeah, we have exposure to healthcare, biotech, even though it's been grounded lately, but the long-term view is very good, and some things like that. Innovation, as far as technology, we are invested in a number of things. Certainly food services. We still have some focus in food services. But we really like to have a lot of diversification in what we're doing. Purposeful, diversification.
And yeah, you forgot to mention the real estate tech and fintech and insure tech that Modern represents, of course.
Exactly, we have a lot of that too.
Yeah, and I guess the sustainability, I know that you guys have been exploring this as a broad theme as well. So would love to hear some of your thoughts of where you're focusing your time there.
Yeah, we really look at that and try to find specialists that also are engaged in that area. For example, when we think of like an icon that can change the landscape of affordable housing, it's something that's of interest to us in our involvement in thresholds and trying to find housing for people that are mentally ill. And so, we look at something like that and think this could change the world for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we're really, behind it. We also, are invested in like Priya Parish's fund, and she is very involved in different things. They have a firm called Footprint, which is sustainable packaging for food services. Something very interesting to everyone when we look at the waste of things like, packaging for food. So we try to find specialists that can find those magical companies that can make a difference in a really big way and invest in that way.
And what about you, Rocco? What do you think in terms of looking back at what you've done and in the future, things that you're excited about?
So when I think about my earlier investments, many times the companies that we invested in or acquired were in small communities, and we were typically the largest employer in those communities. So, we were always socially conscious of that, and that we had to support not only our labor force, but also the communities surrounding those businesses, and felt a fiduciary responsibility that I think private equity doesn't get much credit for, but we certainly every decision we made was with that in mind. So when I think about some of the new things that are going on, from a tech-enabled business services, or just software that's being developed. We have some investments in those arenas where are not only good things for profitability, they're also good for people, improving their lives and safety.
Yeah, and back to those inflationary pressures, everything's going to be top of mind of creating efficiencies operationally and trying to reduce some of those costs and figuring out how to pass some of that on. I think that tech-enabled services are going to be a big way in the future as well.
Well, especially with the tight labor market that we're in today.
Right. Where is everybody? I don't know. That's part of the question. The big resign too. Good.
We're waiting for the better offer, I'll tell you that.
Better offer, and it keeps coming, I think, is what I hear. So you guys in some ways are very much my heroes. So people say over and over again, well, you can't have it all, you have to sacrifice something, but you guys, at least from my perspective, you managed to do it. You have a relationship that has lasted since you guys met, I guess your senior year of high school, Roxanne. And and a beautiful family, 2 sons, one at least that I know really well, and you guys have been able to manage these really amazing careers. You give back to the community so much, and so obviously none of this again without challenges, I'm sure, but how do you manage to have it all? Because I've always been a proponent that you can. And so how did you do it? How did you manage to make it all work?
Well, I would say, one, we really wanted to enjoy life to its fullest. And so we're both committed to not only being successful, but having fun and having a wonderful family. And so, in the childbearing years, where we were raising our children, it was much harder than it is today because of the coordination. We both had substantial travel schedules. We both traveled probably about 150,000 miles a year. And so to do that, we had to coordinate. We made a commitment that somebody would always be home. And so if I traveled, Rocco didn't, and vice versa. We kept a 4-month calendar where we had all our trips on it. And we were committed to each other's careers and very supportive of each other. And I think that was really very, very key. But it did require a lot of coordination. Also, I should add, we had one caregiver for all 30 years of raising our children,
Wow.
which was a gift, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of our family, and the coordination sometimes didn't always work. That we had to do things on the fly because of weather, cancellations of flights, meetings that couldn't be deferred, all of that. So there's always challenges that you have to work through.
And we had a very supportive family also.
Good. Yeah, I'm familiar with those last minute cancellations and calling the caregiver and say, can you stay overnight, please? We're both stranded.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I think it's the commitment to one another's careers is perhaps the biggest thing that is so important, and seeing it work and seeing it thrive. And I think that as I said, you guys are heroes to me in that example, because I think you both prove that you can do it all. And so it's great. And I think that part of you all doing it all too is come to starting to focus on the community. So the schools that you're intimately involved with, the boards all across Chicago, from the hospitals to the investment community and so on. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how that part of your careers and lives, personal lives have evolved, and why it's important to you.
For me, it really started in my early 30s, I would say. I was very interested in helping the homeless. And so I found Thresholds here in Chicago and have been a board member there for over 30 years that deals with people that have severe mental illness. And it's been an extremely rewarding journey. I also really through that felt like I should be using my skills to help people that actually would have a hard time helping themselves. And I spend a great deal of time now at Lurie Children's Hospital and with the board work there. And again, that's a population where, the children obviously are children, but even their families, they don't have time. They're taking care of sick children to, talk to legislators and raise funds for research and things like that. So I feel like those are, focuses that I could use my skills to really further. And then education has always been something I've been interested in, because I really feel like that is the differentiator for everyone. And so, when we talk about equality and, changing lives, I think education is the best way to do it. And so I've been very involved in a number of organizations that can allow a broader array of people to access education.
Yeah, and the way I look at it, Constant, is that we've been very fortunate in our careers. We're probably at places we never dreamed of when we first met. And this is a culmination of our life's work to be able to, give back to the communities. And I would say that I probably, in the organizations that I've been involved with, have received way more out of my involvement than I would, potentially give. We've been always focused, as Roxanne said, on education as being a differentiator. So even through Notre Dame or Loyola, it's always concentrated on, the folks who come from families who can't necessarily afford to go to places of higher learning. As an example, Loyola has the Sarupe College, which is basically a 2-year associate's degree. It's one of the few places in the United States that brings in people from the Chicagoland area and basically a very diverse, almost every one of them are minority students. And they're on a free ride and an opportunity to continue their education and make a difference in their families. And sometimes they're homeless. And so that really rings true for us in some of the things that we're involved with. And, the hospital care, we just learned so much over the course of time.
And I'm so glad you guys are putting that kind of effort, and it's something you can't help but see in front of your face every time you walk around in Chicago, right? It's everywhere, and any major city, especially now. And so, it resonates a lot to talk about how you help people help themselves, and through things like the education and healthcare and others. I'm so glad that you guys are spending so much of your time and effort into it.
Thank you.
So I guess we'll shift towards what we like to always kind of wrap with, which is, a little bit more of the kind of what you've, some of the biggest lessons learned, and the advice that you will give to others aspiring to do some of the great things that you guys have been able to do over your careers. So why don't we start with any, kind of personal challenge that you've overcome and how you did that, and then advice to those aspiring entrepreneurs out there.
I think I'll just start with some hopefully thoughtful advice.
Great.
I think there's these little terms that are used in people's offices, and some people might say you're lucky, but it's really hard work that brings the luck. And I think both of us work really, really hard to bring good fortune, and we're very fortunate as a result of that. But there's too many people who believe today that again, they're going to basically turn the page and have a lot of success, but that doesn't always happen that way. I mean, as you know, there's lots of curves in the road that you have to take a challenge and make the best of it.
Yeah, I would say, we both picked fields that we were really interested in. And they were fields that people didn't know anything about at the time. And so finding something that you're interested in that you want to learn a lot about and become an expert in it is really a great place to be on all levels, because we all have a lot of things we could do with our lives. It always seemed worth it because you were learning more, you were meeting more interesting people. Both of us became specialists in our fields. And so I think my advice would be find something you're interested in first and then become an expert in it. It's also good to keep an eye on the fact that you'd like to make a living, which we definitely had to do. So that was also important. But I feel like we both selected areas that we just enjoyed and still do. We still do, so that would be my advice.
Great. Well, Roxanne, Rocco, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This is really great. And I think people really enjoy getting to know sort of a little bit more about, people they've been reading about and aspire to be and or aspire to, be like. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for
Yeah,
inviting us. It's a fun forum, and I hope everyone enjoys it.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity, Constance.
Yeah, and thanks for all you do for us.
Thank you. All right, everybody, that wraps another session of our speaker series. And thank you so much for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye-bye.